This is Seamus Coleman. You probably know him from being a club servant at Everton, having played over 400 games for the club, and he has been club captain since the 2019-20 season. But there's one thing that I didn't mention. He's 34, starting his career in the 2009-10 season. This is Gabby Martinelli, and this is Willy Gnonto, two players who combined are only 6 years older than Seamus. Martinelli has scored 8 goals as a regular first-team player, and Gnonto has emerged as a player of high potential, playing regular minutes since early November, bagging 2 goals and an assist as a bright spot for Leeds in a dire season. Both players have proven to be troublesome and a tough task to contain. Why mention these two names? Well, both players who on paper should tear Seamus Coleman to shreds, Seamus Coleman had in his back pocket. Today we're discussing a simple tactical maneuver which has seen Seamus Coleman a rejuvenated player. Now, there's a simple phrase to describe this situation. Do better when given less. You see, Seamus Coleman hasn't necessarily played better. It's a matter of the system providing a suitable environment around Seamus to thrive and do what he's good at. This environment being that Seamus's ability is being highlighted, whilst essentially the paint is being applied over the cracks with regards to his weaknesses. Let's break it down. Here's a list of things Seamus is good at. Defending. Why? Because he's experienced. He's been in plenty of different scenarios, had plenty of different assignments, and he does his job well. There's a reason most of his 14 seasons, he's played upwards of 20 games. What's Seamus not so good at? Pace. Yeah, Father Time can catch up to you in some ways, and that's one of them. With this obvious information, theoretically all you need to do is maximize his defending and plaster up the issue of his pace. A simple Sean Dyche tactic has allowed this to happen, and thus, it is perceived that Seamus is playing better, when in reality, it's just that Dyche's system is a protective layer over what Seamus is weaker at. When Sean Dyche arrived at the club, he ran a yo-yo test. We know Dyche's mantra is minimum requirement is maximum effort. Dyche wants his endurance runners, the running machines, out on the park. Two of the last standing were Dwight McNeil and Alex Iwobi. These two are important figures in what we're discussing. Now, Dyche's system defensively naturally forces the ball out wide, congesting the middle channel of the pitch. Sending the ball out wide is where Seamus's players are occupying space, so in theory this sounds nightmarish. No. The Everton winger comes back and traps the opposing winger. In our case, Iwobi and McNeil are the enforcers. That extra number does two things. Players obviously want to be permitted more space when cutting inside because the angle becomes easier to score from. You know, you're not hindered, you've got more flexibility in the angles, the runs, all the directions you can go. We've seen that in bits and pieces when Gnonto and Martinelli have gotten off the leash. But the extra number cuts that off, or makes things incredibly more difficult. In conjunction with where the winger is moving, the Everton winger and Coleman's movements correlate and sandwich the opposing winger in. If they go along the touchline, Iwobi for explanation's sake, and Coleman move accordingly. The second, it means Coleman has less angles to worry about. Odds are with the ability of Martinelli and Gnonto, one-on-one Seamus would be toast. They're quick with their dribbling, Coleman can't necessarily anticipate where they're going, and they'll get by. The winger removes that burden, and all Seamus needs to worry about is a rough area of where the attacker could head towards, which is usually along the sideline, because Iwobi or McNeil are marshalling the corridor, and all Seamus needs to do is make a challenge if they try to take him on. He can be more aggressive in his role as well, because he's got less space to cover and can play more man-to-man instead of zone, which would be applied when he's isolated, and it would be suicide to take a gamble. If even one of these two things happen, the attacking winger is either obligated to pass the ball away or lose it. The exception doesn't really happen too often. To re-emphasize, he will do better when given less. It also allows Seamus Coleman to advance forward. It was a common complaint under Frank that there was no presence by the fullbacks creating overlap or making inverted runs. Seamus can progress forward because he's got a protective layer. Usually, one of Garnegay and Decore, who are on Seamus' side of the pitch, can drop into the void Seamus' left moving forward, and if they aren't there, then you've got Connor Cody who shifts across further right, and the rest of the last line also roll across, so usually Taki and Mikolenko. Yet again, doing better when given less. Seamus isn't shackled down by a fear in the vulnerability he's creating, which attacking-wise is beneficial for the team because it adds an extra element for defenses to monitor, and defensively we still remain sound. The most dangerous and threatening thing for defenders to deal with is when players with pace run at them and try to break the lines. This becomes a particularly perilous situation should he be faced with it. But the good thing about structure is oppositions need to do a lot of switching and short sideways passes, a lot of quick passes. Good thing is, with a structure, the wingers such as Nonto and Martinelli in the games we're highlighting often have their backs turned trying to present, but knowing the spaces to run into are limited. Players like Nonto and Martinelli are ineffective playing like this, with such limitations, unable to utilize their pace. Another thing to note, especially with a very organized structure when without the ball, oppositions need to find ways to weave through, and find spaces for players to operate. And so diagonal passing and lofted passing to try find a way through is a thing that teams have thrown at us, either for better or for worse. For players like Nonto or Martinelli, it doesn't necessarily come too naturally at their heights to win too many headers and be productive, so this plays into the favour of Seamus. With taller wingers, you may have found a weak spot in the Dyche system, specifically that sheet of protection over Seamus. That said, more often than not, wingers are on the smaller side. If the lofted diagonal pass doesn't work, oppositions try to mix it up with lower, quicker diagonal passing. Yet, the Dyche system that promotes gut running means our recovery is usually pretty quick after having lost the ball. And so, oppositions are often met with traffic as the ball is in transit and the path is ineffective. Seamus' pace in this system, among many others, is exposed simply if the defensive structure isn't set. This is manifested if A, you turn the ball over in a vulnerable position high up the pitch, and B, if all your numbers have committed to an attacking position, so for example from a set piece such as a corner. That said, in the first 3 games we've seen that sparingly, and it's only really happened more consistently against Liverpool. If we talk about that game for a moment, Liverpool and Coleman's most consistent opponent, Darwin Núñez, was a different beast altogether. Overlap seemed to be far more consistent and achievable, and Núñez would establish positions more internally, summarising a team who seemed far more assertive in trying to get through our wall of defenders. There were plenty of counter-attacking situations for Liverpool, and the structure wasn't as sound as we saw either side of this game. Midfielders getting bypassed way too easily, and then the burden was raised on the likes of Seamus, who did look much more in an uncomfortable space because the ball's being carried quicker with less support getting back, and so Seamus doesn't really have the capacity to cope with this particularly well. He can only run so fast, and his limit isn't even close to the threshold of younger players. We can look at this game, we can look at games where Nonto and Martinelli have been damaging, and it's clear to see that A, they're scary when given the opportunity to operate in central areas, and B, they can break games wide open with their pace and technique. I can even go back as far as Everton-Bournemouth, a game under Lampard, which can also share the importance of structure, especially when you've got a fullback who's trending downward and is in the twilight phase of his career. But if Sean Dyche knows one thing, it's keeping things simple. And simply put, we know it would be suicide to completely isolate younger, energetic, quick on their feet wingers on Seamus, whose lateral movement and physical capabilities aren't as high of a standard, as if a genius couldn't work it out. So the simple resolution of his teammates providing support both with and without the ball means that Seamus is much more free in his play and can focus on doing fewer duties that he's good at better, rather than tackling several extra duties on top, which aren't done at a high level because he's not able to fully commit to each task. I mean, in other words, he's 34, don't run him into the ground. Doing better when given less. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure to drop a like and subscribe if you are new. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.